The first morning of the new semester arrived beneath a clear blue sky as thousands of students filled the university campus with laughter, conversations and excitement, but hidden beneath all the noise there was one name that everyone whispered with fear: Adrien Knight. Nobody knew the complete truth about him, yet everyone had a different story. Some claimed he was the son of one of the richest families in the country, others believed he secretly controlled student politics, while many insisted that every person who ever stood against him eventually disappeared from the university without explanation. Nobody knew whether the stories were true because Adrien never defended himself and never explained anything. He simply walked through the campus with the same calm expression every single day, ignoring every curious stare and frightened whisper, until that ordinary morning when Emily Carter stepped through the university gates, for the very first time carrying a backpack filled with sketchbooks and dreams. She had transferred from a small town where nobody cared about wealth, popularity or status, and she had absolutely no idea who Adrien Knight was. While searching for the administration office, she accidentally bumped into another student, causing dozens of beautifully hand-drawn sketches to scatter across the stone pathway. Before she could collect them, a strong gust of wind lifted one portrait into the air and carried it across the courtyard, where it landed directly beside Adrien's polished shoes. Every conversation stopped instantly. Hundreds of students watched in complete silence, expecting another terrifying scene because nobody had ever dared inconvenience Adrien before. Emily hurried across the courtyard with embarrassment written all over her face, apologizing before she even reached him, but instead of walking away, Adrien slowly bent down, picked up the drawing with surprising care and studied it for several quiet seconds. It was a portrait of an elderly woman smiling gently beneath an old cherry blossom tree. Every wrinkle, every shadow and every line carried warmth rather than sadness. Adrien looked at the artwork much longer than anyone expected, then finally raised his eyes toward Emily, who stood frozen with nervousness. He extended the drawing toward her and said in a calm voice, "You did not draw her face, you drew her memories." Emily blinked in surprise because nobody had ever described her art that way before. She quietly thanked him, accepted the sketch and watched him walk away without another word, leaving the entire courtyard speechless. The moment Adrien disappeared around the corner, dozens of students surrounded Emily, asking who she was, how she knew him, and why Adrien had spoken to her as if they were already friends. Emily could only shake her head because she honestly did not know his name until someone whispered with disbelief, "That was Adrien Knight, and your life is never going to be the same again." Emily tried to ignore the strange looks that followed her across the campus, but everywhere she walked, students whispered behind her back, wondering why Adrien Knight had spoken to a girl nobody had ever seen before. While she convinced herself that everyone was simply exaggerating, she entered her first business management class and quietly took an empty seat near the window, hoping for a peaceful beginning to her new life. The professor welcomed everyone before announcing that the semester would begin with a long-term partner project worth almost half of their final grade. Excitement quickly spread through the classroom until he began reading the names one by one, pairing students together. Then after several minutes he adjusted his glasses, smiled slightly and said, "Emily Carter, your partner will be Adrien Knight." The entire classroom fell silent. Emily looked around in confusion while a tall figure slowly stood from the last row. I followed him as Adrien calmly walked toward her desk. Without the slightest hint of emotion, he stopped beside her, offered his hand and introduced himself with a simple "Hello, I am Adrien." Emily smiled politely and shook his hand, saying, "It is nice to meet you," completely unaware that half the class looked as though they had just witnessed something impossible. After the lecture ended, nobody approached Emily except one cheerful student named Noah, who invited her to lunch because he felt sorry seeing everyone avoid her while they sat together in the crowded cafeteria. Noah finally asked the question everyone else was too afraid to ask. "What exactly happened between you and Adrien this morning?" Emily laughed softly and explained that she had only dropped one of her drawings and he had kindly returned it. Noah almost dropped his drink because, according to every rumor, Adrien never helped anyone unless there was a reason. Emily insisted that he seemed respectful rather than frightening, but Noah only smiled nervously and warned her that appearances could be deceiving because every mysterious person looked harmless until people learned the truth. Meanwhile, from the second-floor balcony, Adrien quietly watched Emily laughing with Noah. For the first time in years, a faint smile appeared on his usually expressionless face. His closest friend Marcus noticed immediately and asked, "Why are you looking at her like that?" Adrien remained silent for several moments before answering in a voice barely above a whisper, "Because I finally found the girl whose paintings I have been searching for during the last 3 years, and this time I am not going to lose her again." The following morning, Emily arrived earlier than usual, hoping to avoid the endless whispers that had followed her throughout her first day, but the moment she entered the campus she noticed dozens of students gathered around the central notice board where the list of project topics had just been posted. As she carefully made her way through the crowd, she suddenly felt someone standing beside her, and before she could even turn around, a familiar, calm voice quietly asked, "Have you chosen a topic yet?" She looked up and found Adrien standing next to her, causing the entire crowd to freeze. Once again Emily smiled awkwardly and admitted that she had no idea what to choose because everything still felt new to her. Adrien glanced at the list for only a few seconds before pointing toward the final topic, community development through creative innovation, and said, "This one suits you." She looked confused and asked why. He answered, "Because artists solve problems differently than businessmen, and I think that difference will make us stronger." Before she could respond, another student accidentally bumped into Emily, causing several books to fall from her hands. Adrien instinctively caught them before they touched the ground and handed them back without saying a word, while everyone nearby watched in complete disbelief because the cold and untouchable Adrien Knight, whom nobody dared approach, was helping the new transfer student. Again, rumors spread across the university within minutes. Some students claimed Adrien had finally fallen in love, while others insisted Emily must secretly belong to an influential family, but neither of them paid attention to the gossip. Later that afternoon they met in the library to discuss their assignment. Emily opened her notebook filled with colorful sketches and creative ideas, while Adrien quietly listened without interrupting. After nearly an hour she apologized because she felt her ideas sounded childish, but Adrien gently shook his head and replied, "The world changes because someone is brave enough to imagine something others cannot see. You should never apologize for your imagination." Those simple words stayed with Emily because nobody had ever believed in her dreams so confidently. While they continued planning their project, Marcus secretly watched them from another table, smiling to himself because for the first time since Adrien had entered the university 4 years earlier he looked genuinely peaceful, as though the heavy burden he had carried for years had finally begun to disappear. Yet neither Emily nor Adrien noticed another pair of eyes watching them from outside the library window. Someone quietly took several photographs before sending them to an unknown number with a single message: "The girl has finally met Adrien Knight. Begin the plan now." The next few days passed quietly, but the rumors surrounding Emily only grew stronger. Wherever she walked, students stared at her, whispered her name, and wondered why Adrien Knight, who had ignored the entire university for years, suddenly spent so much time with a transfer student. Emily tried her best to focus on classes and their project, but deep inside she could feel that something unusual was happening. One afternoon after finishing their lecture, Adrien asked if she wanted to visit the old botanical garden behind the campus, explaining that it was the perfect place to find inspiration for creative ideas. Although she hesitated for a moment, she eventually agreed because she had never explored that part of the university before. The garden was peaceful, filled with colorful flowers, old stone paths, and the sound of birds singing. While Emily admired the scenery, she noticed Adrien quietly watching her. Instead of the beautiful landscape, she laughed softly and asked, "Why are you looking at me instead of the flowers?" Adrien answered, "Because you smile at small things most people never notice, and that is much rarer than any flower in this garden." Emily felt her heart skip a beat, but before she could respond her phone suddenly vibrated with an unknown message. She opened it and her smile instantly disappeared. The message contained an old photograph of Adrien standing beside a young man covered in blood, followed by a single sentence: "Stay away from him if you want to protect your future." Emily quickly looked at Adrien, who noticed the fear in her eyes but did not ask about the message because he already knew someone had started moving against him. Again at that exact moment, hidden behind the trees, a mysterious man lowered his camera. After secretly taking dozens of photographs of the two together, he smiled coldly and whispered, "Everything is going exactly as planned. Soon she will discover who Adrien Knight really is, and when that day comes she will leave him just like everyone else." Before disappearing into the shadows, leaving behind only silence, while Adrien unknowingly looked at Emily with the same quiet hope he had carried in his heart ever since the day he first saw one of her paintings 3 years ago, believing that this time fate might finally give him the chance to protect the one person who had unknowingly become the light in his otherwise lonely world.